Yo. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to part 2 of the LOST Horror Media Iceberg. If you haven't seen part 1 yet, be sure to go check that out first. But with all that being said, let's jump right into it, shall we? But first, I'd love to tell you about today's sponsor, ZocDoc. As a YouTuber and a guy who creates stuff on the internet, I'm at my desk a lot, sitting, staring at a screen, typing away on my keyboard. And it's not exactly the best for my back or anyone else who has to sit down for 8 hours a day working like that. That's where today's video sponsored ZocDoc helped me out, and it can help you too. ZocDoc is this awesome free site that helps you find top-rated doctors, including chiropractors for those back pains, right near you. You don't have to talk to anyone to get an appointment either. You just book it with a few clicks. So if you're looking for some help with your back after a long day of hunching over your desk, or for any other health need or concern you may have, head over to ZocDoc.com/nightowl. I booked the chiropractor appointment in just a few clicks, and I'm already on the road to feeling much better. So take care of yourself, my friends, when ZocDoc makes it so easy. Support the channel and feel better. Go to ZocDoc.com/nightowl and get back to feeling your best. Thank you so very much for ZocDoc for sponsoring this video, and now, back to the show. Dracula's Death. Starting this tier out, Dracula's Death is a 1923 silent Hungarian horror film and may have been one of the first films to feature the character of Dracula, which is pretty interesting. The plot of the film apparently was about a woman named Mary who starts having frightening visions after seeing an insane asylum inmate who claims to be Dracula. She begins to have trouble discerning reality from her nightmares, and eventually she is kidnapped by Dracula and taken back to his castle to have a satanic wedding. Obviously a pretty different plot from your normal Dracula affair, but certainly sounds pretty interesting. But sadly, it has been lost for many years, again due to them just not taking very good care of these films back in the day. Though a few photos have survived, which you can see here to kind of get a vibe for how the film might have been like. Cannibal Holocaust, Lost Unfinished Piranha Scene. Oh boy. Talk about opening a can of worms. I suppose I should note that Cannibal Holocaust is often considered one of the most controversial horror films ever made. Directed by Rogerio Deodato, the film is about a missing documentary crew that was filming cannibal tribes in the Amazon. New York University anthropologist Harold Monroe is sent on an expedition to track down the missing crew, and in doing so, recovers the lost crew's cans of film, which are then reviewed by an American broadcast station that wishes to air them, only to find the contents contained within those tapes to be truly disturbing and can never be shown to the public. This, in a sense, kind of makes this movie the first of its kind, a found footage horror film. While the structure of the film isn't exactly like those, as those usually begin immediately with just the documentary session, this concept nonetheless would later go on to inspire a whole genre, including the likes of the Blair Witch Project, Paranormal Activity, among many, many others. At any rate, Cannibal Holocaust stirred up a bunch of controversy back when it came out, both due to its extremely graphic violence, including an infamous impalement scene that is sometimes seen on the front cover of DVDs sold of it, but also due to its on-screen killings of live animals, assault, and snuff film allegations that managed to land the film's director in jail on obscenity charges and possible murder. Mind you, the snuff stuff as well as the SA claims were completely false, and was all just simply movie magic, I suppose you could say. But there were unfortunately real on-screen deaths of animals, including a turtle, pig, a squirrel monkey, among several others, which is very fucked up. The film was banned in the United Kingdom, Australia, South Africa, and several other countries due to its graphic content and again actual harm of animals. Though the claims of it being so real it's like it were a real snuff film actually was some pretty great marketing for it, and thus it went on to get a bit of a cult following as a really fucked up film that manages to get under most people's skin to some degree as it became available through other means, particularly in America. It also being considered the apex of the cannibal genre, which yes, is a genre, which usually consists of a group of people out in the jungle that are eventually captured, tortured, and killed and eaten by cannibal tribes. Anyway, enough film history lesson stuff. What about the lost scene in the film? Well, the wiki describes it as, quote, among the many gruesome scenes in the film, another one was scripted that is commonly dubbed the piranha scene. In this scene, a single Shamatari warrior injured in battle was to have his leg amputated by warriors of the Yanomamo tribe. The tribe would then tie the Shamatari warrior to a log and lower him into the piranha-infested waters, slowly being eaten alive by the fearsome fish, unquote. At any rate, they did film some of this scene, with some surviving stills of it that I'm pretty sure I can't show here on YouTube, unfortunately. But they were never able to finish the scene due to the piranhas being difficult to control, and the film's crew underwater camera was malfunctioning. Thus the scene was eventually scrapped. No one knows if there's any footage of it still around, but yeah. Child's Play 2-hour cut. Child's Play is an American horror film that was written and directed by Tom Holland and released on November 9th of 1988. It's about a serial killer who, through a voodoo ritual, has his soul transferred into a doll. A good guy doll, that is. And now he's planning on using the same ritual again to possess the body of a little kid he's found himself being the Christmas gift of, all while killing anyone who gets in his way. It's a great film, and Chucky, the killer doll, is one of the most iconic slasher movie villains for a reason. However, the first film is exactly 1 hour and 27 minutes, but it was originally going to be a 2-hour film, and frankly was just a totally different movie in a lot of ways. To start, originally the character of Chucky was voiced by Jessica Walter, with an electronic overlay for her voice, inspired heavily off her performance in Play Misty with Me. However, director Tom Holland noted that while her voice fit the threatening parts of the script, the more comical parts just didn't work. They would eventually decide on using Brad Dourif for the role of Chucky, which would end up being a pretty iconic choice, as he would go on to voice him in every film after, even to this day, I guess outside of the remake.
I said talk to me, damn it, or else I'm gonna throw you in the fire!
You stupid bitch, you filthy slut! Did you fuck with me?
Anyway, so what about the deleted scenes? Well, they consist of these as far as we know, which I'll put up an accompanying photo to the scene if available. Quote, the opening scene originally included Detective Norris in women's clothing and attempting to catch the film's killer Charles Chucky Lee Ray. Norris leaves a bar while Charles and Eddie Caputo follow him in a car. Charles gets out of the car, stalks Norris, still in disguise, on foot, and then confronts him in an alley. Norris then reveals himself and kicks Charles in the groin. Charles gets up, throws a trash can at Norris, and flees from him, which leads to the chase shown in the final film. Then in another scene, while Andy shows Chucky his room, he shows the doll a photo of his deceased father, saying to Chucky, "This is Mom and my dad Bob. He died in a car wreck, but Mom and I loved him very much." And he also shows Chucky the toy train he got. The photo of Bob is actually of director Tom Holland, and can be seen in several places in the final film. Another scene is Andy was originally shown falling down a ditch during the explosion of Eddie Caputo's house, and Caputo's death due to the blast, instead of in the final film where Andy is only outside of the house and away from the explosion. Another scene would have shown the character of John Bishop, also known as Dr. Death, performing a voodoo healing with his mother on an infant while dressed in voodoo priest clothes in Haitian Creole. He rubs an amulet on the infant, which is seemingly cured by the ritual, and John gives the amulet to its family to keep. The family then pays John and leaves shortly before Chucky arrives. Karen and Mike visit the burnt toy store at the start of the film after Karen asks about Charles, and they find a bunch of undamaged toys in the alleyway beside the store, explaining how the homeless man named Peddler found Chucky. These next two scenes would have been connected and seemingly would have been a decent little amount of screen time, as children's psychologist Dr. Ardmore places a normal good guy doll in Andy's room at the psychiatric clinic, attempting to convince Andy that it's just a toy and that it's not alive. Andy is not convinced, however, and Ardmore admits the truth, but does not believe Andy's claims that Chucky is coming to kill Andy, and leaves and locks Andy up. Chucky is then stalking Andy at the clinic, and he climbs up to Andy's window, who blocks it with a table, forcing Chucky to find another window to get inside. And then, the film originally had an alternate ending, where after Chucky breaks into the apartment to perform the ritual on Andy, Andy sets up an RC car with a knife taped to it. Chucky enters the kitchen and gets stabbed in the leg by the RC car. Andy finds Chucky and squirts Drano in his face with a water gun. This causes a chemical reaction with the plastic, which gives Chucky immense pain. Part of Chucky's face melts away, and Andy squirts his leg. Chucky hides quickly and knocks Andy out by choking him with a slinky. Mike searches for Chucky and gets knocked out by him. Karen throws Chucky in the fireplace as several officers arrive. Jack grabs a baseball bat and knocks Chucky's head off, which rolls, and bites an officer on the leg. Karen then shoots Chucky's body in the heart as he says, "I love you, Heidi ho, ha 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 ha." The officer collects the doll's remains, and Jack tells them it was never alive, and offers to buy them a drink. The RC car can be seen in the final film, most notably during the scene in which Andy hides in his closet, unquote. As you've seen, several photos of the 2-hour cut can be found. The script for these scenes can also be found online as well, but the actual footage from these scenes still has never been released, which is a shame, as while some seem cut for better pacing, some seem like they would have been very interesting to see, at least as deleted scenes on a Blu-ray release or something. Oh, and in case you're wondering why these scenes were cut out, basically the film didn't go over well with test audiences, so they cut them out and changed a few things around, and it seemed to do much better with them being cut after that. Cube alternate ending. Cube is a 1997 sci-fi horror film directed and co-written by Vincino Natili about 6 strangers waking up to find themselves in one of a series of strange interconnected cubicle rooms, half of which are fitted with lethal traps. The group must work together to get through the maze of rooms and traps to escape this hell. It's a great film, but bearing all that in mind, I'm about to spoil the whole thing, so to tell you about its ending and alternate ending, of which is currently lost. Quote, "It has been revealed by Natali that there was a scene shot to take place at the very end of the movie, revealing what happens after the lone survivor, Kazan, escapes the cube. In the finished film, he simply exits into a blinding white light, with it ending before we see what happens next. According to the draft of the script from December 1996, available on Natali's website, the scene consisted of Kazan walking out of the cube and suddenly appearing on a busy street in different clothes. Shoppers and businessmen around him completely oblivious to his presence. Kazan then slowly disappears into the crowd, and the movie fades to black over various shots of towering skyscrapers, identical suburban houses, and roads packed tight with cars, with the script ending on the line, "Another day at the office," unquote. So yeah, I suppose the reason the ending was changed was to have it have a bit more mystery as to what happens after one escapes the cube. Though honestly, both endings seem pretty memorable, and don't really take away anything from the movie in my opinion. But ultimately keeping a mystery maybe was the better choice. The Curse of Frankenstein Lost Acid Bath Scene. The Curse of Frankenstein is one of the many horror films produced by Hammer Films in 1957, which took these classic Universal monsters and added in a flair more of violence. While Bela Lugosi was Universal's go-to for monsters, it was Christopher Lee who would become the iconic Monster Man of Hammer Films, including the likes of Dracula and Frankenstein's monster. The Curse of Frankenstein is notable for being the starting point for Hammer Films' line of classic horror films, making Lee, as well as Peter Cushing, who plays Victor Frankenstein here, household names. At any rate, Victor's on his shit about playing God and creating life, because apparently getting with a bitch to make a baby was just too complicated for him. So you kind of know where the plot's gonna go. It's not a faithful adaptation of the novel by any means, but kind of a strange sort of remake of the 1930 film, but with his own stuff too. The lost scene this entry is referring to is when Victor acquires the body that he plans to build his creature upon, and he finds that the head has been pecked intensely by the crows and deems it unfit for use. Using a small knife, he proceeds to cut the head off the body and carry it over to a large vat of acid. He dips the head in the acid, allowing it to sink deep inside. The film cuts away shortly after Victor places the head into the acid, leaving only a bubbling sound to imply that this is what is taking place. In the original theatrical release of the film, a brief shot actually depicting the prop head being dissolved by the acid was shown. This would be removed in later releases as the BBFC, or the British Board of Film Classification, supposedly felt that this scene was just too morbid. These scenes sadly have been missing ever since, and are more than likely lost forever. Frankenstein lost Bela Lugosi test reel footage. As noted earlier, Bela Lugosi was originally going to play the monster in the 1931 Universal Frankenstein film, before he would be replaced by the iconic Boris Karloff, because Bela didn't like that he didn't get to speak at all with the performance, and that his face would be covered in way too much makeup. However, test reels were created with him in the makeup, and such before he rejected the role, which he would then come to regret. But sadly, those test reels, these pieces of horror film lost history, are more than likely deteriorated or they were destroyed after all these years, and have never been seen publicly. Friday the 13th Part 3 Lost Alternate Endings. Friday the 13th Part 3, often subtitled with 3D, as when it first came out you had the option to see it in 3D, is one of the best slasher films out there, and one of my personal favorites in the Friday the 13th franchise. Though Part 4, the final chapter, will always have my heart for first place. Anyway, this third film is also notable for being the first to have Jason Voorhees get his iconic hockey mask, and that it had two alternate endings that never saw the light of day, with both endings playing out like this. Quote, after killing Jason in the barn, our main heroine, Chris, pushes herself onto the middle of the lake in a canoe, where she falls asleep. The next morning, she wakes to hear Rick, one of her friends, calling for her from the cottage. Chris makes her way to the cottage to greet Rick, but instead she's ambushed by Jason. Now unmasked and wielding a machete, Jason grabs Chris and decapitates her. The next scene shows Chris in the back of a police car, screaming frantically as the police try to comfort her. This sequence was filmed but never used. Instead, a scene depicting Mrs. Voorhees, now with her head back in place, dragging Chris under the lake was used. The reason for the change was because the creators felt that killing off the main heroine would have been just too depressing, dream sequence or not, which is kind of funny to think about. And there are stills from this, as I'm sure you can see here, that go along with this version of the ending. As for the second ending, it would have played out in a similar fashion to the official ending, except Ali, one of the bikers in the movie, would have lived, and he and Chris would have walked off from a dead Jason, and when the police arrived to search the area, the body of Jason would then be missing. This ending was never filmed though, and was cut pretty quickly, though it was actually used in the novelization of the movie, funnily enough. Many still wish to see the first alternate ending footage, with many believing that Paramount still owns the original negatives, that it may eventually be included in some sort of Blu-ray release or something in the future. Halloween 5, The Revenge of Michael Myers, uncut version. Halloween 5, The Revenge of Michael Myers is a 1989 slasher horror film, and is the second entry in what many fans call the Thorn trilogy, which started with Halloween 4 and ends with Halloween 6. The Thorn being in reference to the big twist of this particular trilogy and film timeline of Michael Myers actually being the product of a cult, the Cult of the Thorn specifically. And Yeah, it's pretty dumb if I'm being real with you, but nonetheless, around the time of its release, the MPAA was heavily censoring violent films, demanding constant recuts to allow for the film to receive an R rating. With Friday the 13th Part 7, The New Blood, and Leatherface, The Texas Chainsaw Massacre 3 also being victims of this MPAA censorship, and thus Halloween 5 ended up having a ton of scenes butchered over this. Any prolonged shots of violence were shortened or cut completely, including, quote, Mikey's body begins to twitch on the ground after being stabbed in the head with a gardening tool, and lingered on for less time than originally shot. Scream Factory's October 2021 release's deleted gore bonus feature contains the missing 1 second of cut twitching. A long set of scenes in which Michael Myers arrives at the children's hospital that Jamie and Billy snuck out right before, and proceeds to kill an entire SWAT team that are outside, guarding the building. With actor Don Shanks, who played Michael Myers in the film, describing the scenes on an episode of Horror Hallowed Ground as, quote, first SWAT member is talking on the radio when Michael comes up behind him, breaks his neck, spinning his head around 180, pushes him to the ground, then stomps on his head, pushing it deeper and deeper into the ground, all while there is blood coming out from his eyes, nose, etc. After this kill, another SWAT team member charges at Michael with an M16, which Michael wrestles the gun out of his hand and proceeds to shove or stab, presumably the barrel of the gun, through the SWAT team member's head. After this, Michael proceeds to kill the rest of the SWAT team, but it is not mentioned how they were killed or how many more members there were, unquote. There, as you can see, are a few photos as evidence of this epic SWAT team versus Michael throwdown. Some of the other scenes include, quote, in the tense laundry chute scene, Michael Myers is seen stabbing into said passage with Jamie inside. She is seen crawling out of the intake on the floor above with a vertical stab wound spanning a great span of her leg, which was not shown to have happened. In Scream Factory's October 2021 release, they do show the 1 second of Jamie's leg gushing blood as Michael Myers' knife pierces through both the laundry chute and her leg. However, there is no footage of the blade entering or being removed from her leg, and it is unknown if said footage exists, or if they had only used jump cuts. God, I remember that laundry chute scene used to freak me the hell out as a kid watching this movie. It's probably the best scene in the film as far as pure tension goes. There's also a slight alternate ending in which the shootout at the police station that Michael Myers was being held at was shown on screen, which in film is not shown, and we just see an empty cell and the destruction left after Michael's escape. Again though, some shots of the scene do exist. There is also a rumored change as well, in that apparently the cosmetics team were given the choice to show Michael Myers' burnt up face during a moment where his mask is off, or to instead have his face cast in shadows, which the latter is what ends up being used in the film. But some believe the burnt up version may exist as an alternate cut, but this is unconfirmed. You can still see the makeup in the shadowed version, mind you, but I guess originally or alternatively, we would have seen much more of it. Once again though, if you want to see some of the extended kill shots and other stuff, I recommend checking out MFMT's video showcasing them. Though sadly, stuff like the SWAT team fight and other such things seems to be completely lost for now. Oh, and there is actually one more part of this that was discovered. There's a scene that we actually do have all the full stuff of, that being an alternate opening. See, in the film, after Michael gets shot like 100 fucking times, he ends up falling down and floating down a river, and is then nursed to health by some random old man, and apparently was sleeping in that old man's place for a whole year, which just doesn't make any sense at all. Well, in the original cut, we're going to lean into the cult stuff way sooner, as Michael's unconscious body is found by an occult member named Dr. Death, who proceeds to carry him into a cave, where he performs an incantation ritual, raising the shape from the dead, before then being killed. And while I personally don't like the Michael Myers being an instrument of a cult angle that these trilogy of films end up doing, if you're gonna do it, you might as well go all the way with it, you know? However, this scene was cut due to series producer Mustafa Akkad being disturbed by the occult material. Hellraiser Original Cut. Hellraiser is a 1987 body horror film written and directed by Clive Barker, based on his 1986 novella The Hellbound Heart, as I noted earlier in the Iceberg. But the thing about the film, especially the first one, is there's a lot of body horror, dark sexual content. And I mean, it deals with demons who take pleasure in masochism and sadomasochism. And as you might imagine, this can lead to some pretty out there stuff. And in the original cut of the film, there was a bit more of this, but much like everything else, it had been censored due to the interference from the MPAA, in turn leading to the original cut of the film becoming lost media, although parts of it have been recovered over the years. Some of these cut scenes would include a flashback sex scene between Julia and her other lover Frank, in order to reduce the amount of explicit sexual activity, including anal sex and spanking. A scene whereby a victim of Julia's was wearing no underwear, with an alternate scene where he was being used instead. The murder of Julia's first victim, whereby the amount of times Julia beats him with a hammer was reduced. Kirsty's encounter with Frank, whereby a shot of her sticking her hand into Frank's gut was removed to tone down the explicit gore, and Frank being ripped apart with chains at the end of the film by the Cenobites, unquote. According to Clive Barker, though, he doesn't regret most of these scenes being cut. The only one he does is the very last one with Frank being ripped apart by the chains, as the special effects involved were apparently pretty damn cool. House of a Thousand Corpses, Lost Scenes. House of a Thousand Corpses is a cult classic horror film written and directed by musician Rob Zombie. The film is a kind of weird pseudo reimagining of Texas Chainsaw Massacre in a way, or at least within the spirit and personality of that film. And I find it to be one of Rob Zombie's better films, maybe even his best, though I do think I like Devil's Rejects just a bit more. Anyway, the film was originally set to be released in 2000 by Universal Studios. However, the company ended up shelving the film when they feared an NC-17 rating by the MPAA. That's starting to be a pretty consistent theme for these last few entries if you haven't noticed. So the film would go unreleased until 2003, when Lionsgate acquired the film, and in the process of that, they would end up cutting several scenes out from the film that were deemed too graphic to secure that R rating. Rob did anticipate this a bit though, and many shots of the film were done twice, one with more graphic gore effects and one that had none or very little. Even still, many scenes, notably the ones featuring Baby Firefly, played by Sherry Moon Zombie, Rob's wife, were heavily cut. There are also entire deleted scenes, such as ones involving a character named Miss Bunny, played by Jean Carmen, with her character and subplot being completely removed from the film. Some scenes, including her, would have had her using dead animals as puppets to reenact famous movie moments as an example. The full uncut version of the film is 105 minutes, compared to the 89-minute theatrical cut of the film. The uncut version was once shown on March 13th of 2003 in Argentina at the Mar del Plata Film Festival. But as for the availability of the uncut version, Rob thinks sadly that the uncut one is lost, as they have tried to find it to recover the scenes since for DVD or Blu-ray release, but simply cannot find it. But who knows? It's clear that everyone involved would really like to have the uncut version released, so I suppose it's only a matter of finding it. There was also apparently a pirated screener leaked out online a month before the film's theatrical release, with a runtime of 103 minutes. But it's unknown if this is the uncut version, and the whereabouts of this pirated screener is unknown, sadly. That being said, there is also an alternate ending to the film, which the Lost Media Wiki describes as, quote, press photos from the time show an alternate ending to the film. Little is known about this ending compared to the final release, however. We do know that the character Jerry, played by Chris Hardwick, is eaten alive by zombies. This alternate ending also doesn't include the character Dr. Satan. The ending was changed after receiving poor reception from Universal. After giving Rob Zombie more funding, he was able to change the ending to include Dr. Satan. This footage is presumed to be lost with the rest of the deleted scenes. It is unknown if this alternate ending was shown at the Mar del Plata Film Festival either, or if it was included in the pirated screener version of the film, unquote. Little Shop of Horrors unused and unreleased production material. Little Shop of Horrors is a horror comedy rock musical about a goofy guy named Seymour, who is a florist shop owner who finds himself in the clutches of a plant who can speak and hungers for human flesh and blood. It's actually based on the 1960 film of the same name, but it's obviously pretty different from the musical. Anyway, the musical play would then eventually inspire a film in 1986, and between the film and the stage play, there was a ton of material that was made but ultimately scrapped. Some examples include the score for the musical was originally going to be much closer to the 1960 original film, as well as several songs being made that would end up being cut for either story reasons, quality control, or pacing. Some of these include On the Day That It Started, which was likely cut later to be replaced by the show's title song. I Found Out Hobby was an early attempt for a song for Orin, where he explains where he got his fondness for pain. This song was later cut in favor of Dentist, which is a classic villain song.
You'll be a dentist. You have a talent for causing things.
Among others, some of which you can find performances of here on YouTube, as one-off things for reunions of the musical. The film version also went through a lot of directors, and at one point the draft of the script would have been far darker than the Frank Oz directed film, which we got, which is much lighter in tone like the musical. My Bloody Valentine uncut version. Once again, the MPAA strikes again, with this 1981 film about an old folktale surrounding a deranged murderer killing those who celebrate Valentine's Day, turning out to be true in this Canadian slasher film classic. Basically, this was a case of every single death in the film needed to be cut up in order for the film to get an R rating, and yet even still they wanted to give the movie an X rating. There are apparently a few reasons for these severe cuts, one being the backlash to the Friday the 13th film the year prior, and the other apparently being the murder of John Lennon, which caused a major negative reaction to violence in media in the wake of his death. I'm not really sure what the connecting pieces are here, since one is the death of a real person, and the other is a random slasher movie, but sure, I guess. Nonetheless, the Lost Media Wiki notes, quote, "For a long time, it was believed that the uncut version of the film was the holy grail for horror fans. Paramount refused to release an uncut version, to which Lionsgate acquired the rights for an uncut DVD release in 2009. George Michalka stated that 9 minutes of cuts were made before the release, which caused concern for fans, as when the new version was finally released, only 2.5 minutes were restored, contradicting his earlier statement. He later explained that the other 6 minutes was expository footage that didn't impact the rest of the film, and gave his seal of approval, stating that this was how the film was meant to be seen. It was believed the original negative has either deteriorated beyond repair or has long since disappeared. The footage sourced was from the film's producer John Dunning's storage facility in Canada. This print was 35mm, and the footage that was restored was noticeably grainy and in low quality, which required color correction." Unquote. One scene in particular that seems to be completely lost, though, and is possibly the most violent one, is where a couple gets impaled with a mining drill. In 2019, it was revealed that Paramount and Shout Factory managed to locate the original negative for the uncut scenes, minus 3 small shots that still required the 35mm print. As a result, the entire movie was able to be remastered, and most of the uncut footage no longer being low quality compared to the rest of the film, which is pretty cool. Son of Frankenstein color footage. This one's pretty simple. Son of Frankenstein is a 1939 monster horror film produced by Universal Pictures. As you probably guessed, and while the film itself is in black and white, it was originally gonna be in Technicolor. However, this idea was later scrapped when it was determined that Karloff's makeup for the monster looked too poor or weird in the cinematographer's colors tests. It's not known how much of the film was shot or tested in color, but the reels for it are rumored to be in a Universal vault. However, given that the black and white is so important to the shadows and overall cinematography for these films, I don't think anything is too lost in us not seeing it. Still, I guess it'd be cool to see if it ever popped up. Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2 deleted scenes. I already gushed about how much I love Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2. However, Cannon, the distribution and production company behind the film, forced director Tobe Hooper to remove plot points and scenes from the film for the sake of, not pissing off the MPAA and what have you. Most of these deleted scenes can be found online, and have been included as a special feature on DVD releases. However, there are some scenes that have yet to be found and are considered lost. These scenes include, quote, scenes involving Dennis Hopper's character. Lieutenant Lefty Enright received some of the most severe edits. The original story would have revealed that Stretch, played by Caroline Williams, may have been Enright's illegitimate daughter. According to Hooper, it would have been revealed later on in the film that Enright used Stretch's mother as bait during a drug bust. Hopper then explains that when Enright uses Stretch as bait to trap the Sawyer clan, their relationship comes full circle. With this scene missing, the symmetry was gone. Another lost scene involved Enright in his hotel room. This scene was to occur before the character Stretch meets him for the first time. After eating a worm from a bottle of mezcal, he proceeds to hallucinate chainsaws coming out of the walls around him. One sequence included a 360-degree dolly shot around Enright as he sat in his hotel room, bed, and held his gun. Cinematographer Richard Kuris has stated that saving the outtakes for the film was not a huge priority for Cannon Films, so the current whereabouts of the lost scenes are unknown, unquote. Other noteworthy scenes include a cameo appearance from the famous movie critic Joe Bob Briggs, an extended credit sequence, and cut dialogue between the Sawyers in their van. Doom 4 Lost Build of Cancelled Sequel. So this one is an entirely lost/cancelled game, meant to be a follow-up to Doom 3. The game was gonna be released back on the PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360 and PC, but would eventually be cancelled. Doom 4 was going to be developed by id Software and published by Bethesda, but it would eventually be scrapped in favor of the 2016 Doom remake. It would end up being a pretty damn successful and beloved title. According to the wiki, development on Doom was officially announced at QuakeCon 2007. There would be radio silence in the game after that up until Todd Hollinstead stated more about Doom 4 would be revealed at QuakeCon 2010, when many were disappointed not to see anything from it in 2009. Further stating, when we show it to you, you're gonna love it. Again though, there was radio silence, and at the same time it was working on Doom 4, they were also working on Rage. And at the same time, that would actually end up coming out in 2010, and was not very well received. Then by March 2nd, 2012, screenshots and gameplay for Doom were leaked. When questioned about the leaked content, id Software neither confirmed nor denied that the screenshots were legitimate. Making it all the worse, leaked elements of the story and gameplay were revealed, and many noted how similar to Call of Duty it was, and thus the derogatory name Call of Doom was thrown around. And it wouldn't be long before Doom 4 as a concept was shuttered, with Doom 16 taking its place. According to the wiki, the story and gameplay would have consisted of, quote, leaked footage and art suggested that the game would have been about an invasion of hell on Earth, provoked by the fictional corporation known as Union Aerospace Corporation, or the UAC. The cancelled game's story initially sets on United States, New York City, and Manhattan in the fictional year of 2038. You would start as a lone survivor human who would later be destined to meet a resistance army composed of soldiers and civilians, whose goal was to take down the demons and purge the hellish invasion. The gameplay of Doom 4 was of course going to be a first-person shooter with modern features, meaning that it plays like the final release of the game, but with modern combat features and rage-like slow-mo fights compared to the final game. The project also had a new combat system known as Sync Melee. Sync Melee allowed the players to fight demons with consecutive melee commands until delivering the final blow to kill the enemy. Sync Melee would later be reused and adapted for melee executions in Wolfenstein: The New Order and for the glory kills in Doom 2016. There were going to be complex characters and familiar weapons that were later repurposed for Doom 2016, such as the combat shotgun, super shotgun, handgun, chainsaw, and chain gun, unquote. But yeah, seems like they took some of the best ideas and gameplay concepts and applied them to the new game with a fresh slate, which I think was probably the right call. Doom lost prototype of Sega Saturn port. While we're on the topic of Doom, Doom, as in the original Doom, has been ported to a lot of consoles. Some running better than others, but most being kind of worthless if you can play it on PC like it was supposed to be played by now. Still all the same, a Sega Saturn version was made and is infamous for running like absolute ass. It was basically a port of the PlayStation version with several features omitted and abysmal frame rate, averaging a 13 frames per second, and is highly regarded as one of the worst ports of the game. This seems to have happened because this port was rushed out, but originally the Sega Saturn release was gonna have a lot more care put into it, and was meant to be the best version of the game for consoles yet. Dubbed Jim Bagley's prototype, Sega Saturn port was originally meant to be an entirely unique project, not based on the PS1 port, that was itself based on the Atari Jaguar port. Ray Software's original goal was to port the original PC release of Doom 1 and 2 with no levels cut like in previous console releases. Jim Bagley basically wrote a custom image based on Doom's ID Tech 1 game engine, which made full use of Sega Saturn's hardware, and his version apparently was running at 60 FPS, which was a very rare feat in 3D Saturn games, let alone first-person shooters, and could run at full screen on stock Saturn hardware. However, when this prototype was sent to id Software for approval, even with all the feats achieved by Jim Bagley, id founder John Carmack was unsatisfied with the prototype, telling Bagley to rewrite the entire code to run in software mode, therefore using solely the CPU to run the game, to prevent a fine texture warping, a quirk from 32-bit consoles like the Saturn and the PlayStation, which Carmack hated. However, due to the time constraints, basically this meant that they weren't really able to do that, and they just had to port the PS1 version over, and rather badly at that. Which is a real shame, as clearly it was the wrong call by John Carmack, as he himself even later admitted that he should have let more experimentation with the Saturn hardware go through. All the same, this build of the game has never surfaced and most likely never will. Doom Episode 5. Last one related to Doom for now. This is one that actually is not confirmed. According to the wiki page on the topic, quote, in 2015, id Software co-founder John Romero released a dump of source files from Doom and Doom 2 to the doomworld.com forums. One noteworthy file included in this development dump was a map file called E5M1 DWD, dated March 29th of 1995, about a month before the release of the Ultimate Doom. In its final Ultimate version, Doom had a total of 4 episodes with 8 levels, and a bonus level each. The existence of E5M1 DWD file may imply a 5th episode to the game was in production, but ultimately was scrapped. Little is known about the possible episode and what its content would have been, beyond the leaked map file, unquote. But yeah, that's pretty much it. It's just kind of speculation. Resident Evil 4 beta builds. Resident Evil 4 is, well, the 4th installment in the Resident Evil franchise, and is often considered a fan favorite and is a damn banger of a game. Even outside of being a survival horror game, it just has great gameplay and is very addicting. That aside, Resident Evil 4 is also pretty well known for having some early builds and beta content that seem to be completely different in tone and story from the final game. Quote, Resident Evil 4 had a troubled development cycle. The game was originally slated to be released on the PlayStation 2 in 2001. Due to conflicts with the writing staff, Capcom took the assets from the first build of Resident Evil 4 and put them into Devil May Cry. It was stated that the beta for the first build was too action-oriented, and thus it was scrapped. The first beta showed Leon in a metallic structure, later confirmed for the setting to be on an airship, fighting a bizarre fog creature. The few words spoken in the trailer were about the cradle of the progenitor virus, and apparently the story centered on the assault of our heroes to Umbrella Europe. Moreover, Leon would have probably been infected and possibly wielded supernatural powers. Then, at E3 2003, Resident Evil 4 was shown again. This version had different features and a new emphasis on the supernatural that seemed to bring the game closer to Silent Hill. In this new version, Leon, who still had some strange power, was inside a mansion infested with some strange presence, notably a strong creature with a hook, given the name Hookman in one video. An extended video of this beta is featured on Biohazard 4's secret DVD, where we can also see the killer armors still present in the final game on Ashley's stage.
Resident Evil 4.
Although the last beta seemed to be the most promising and polished version yet, Capcom decided to scrap the beta and start over again. The third beta, which according to programmers features zombies, was not presented to the public." Unquote. I do really love the game that we got, but it's interesting to see how different Resident Evil 4 was gonna be, and how many ideas they threw at the wall, and even presented to the public before they finally ended on the one that we all know today. The Phantom of the Opera Lost TV Scenes. This one is in reference to the 1962 Hammer horror version of the Phantom of the Opera, which does feature a pretty killer mask design for the Phantom, by the way. When the film was later premiered on American TV on NBC in the mid-1960s, it had new scenes added to the film, bumping the runtime up from 84 minutes to 98 minutes. A subplot was created involving a pair of Scotland Yard police inspectors on the trail of the Phantom. I guess to fit more commercials in there or something? Kind of a random addition, but nonetheless, these additional scenes were not shot by Hammer, nor did they have any input. It was created by Universal Studios, and thus, in the home releases, these scenes were not included, meaning for some time, these new scenes had not been seen by anyone but those who watched the movie on that channel back in the day. However, this is a case where the lost scenes were actually completely found. As of August 11th of 2020, Shout Factory released a collector's edition Blu-ray, which featured the longer version as a bonus feature. If you haven't noticed, Shout Factory, or as they're sometimes called Scream Factory, is usually on the case with these lost film cuts, which I think is pretty cool. Sleepaway Camp Lost Soundtrack Songs. And for our final entry this tier, Sleepaway Camp is yet another slasher film from 1983, and is, as you might imagine, a cult classic that's most well known for its crazy plot twist of an ending, which I suppose, since it's not relevant to this entry, I won't reveal to you, but if you know, you know. If you don't know, I guess go watch it. Anyway, there are actually a few songs that were made specifically for this film, and for some time, people could not hear the full versions of these songs, since they were never officially released on a CD or anything. Those tracks were called Just What I've Been Looking For, Take a Chance, and Tonight You're Mine, the latter two not existing for anyone to listen to outside of the film. I don't think I can show you the audio from the songs, but luckily the songs have been recovered in 2015 when the master tape was discovered, and they are both available for you to listen to right now here on YouTube. The Ring Lost Movie Teasers and Trailers. Starting this tier off, we have an entry all about the advertising surrounding the 2002 film The Ring, a film about a journalist who discovers a cursed videotape that causes its viewers to die 7 days later after seeing it. The film is actually a remake of the 1998 film Ringu, a Japanese supernatural psychological horror film about a pretty similar plot. It's a very influential film, and if you couldn't tell, it's one of the origin points for the chainmail type creepypastas, cursed media, that sort of stuff. However, before the 2002 film came out, there were several websites that hosted little teasers and trailers for the movie, notably the sites SadekoIsDead.com and SamuraIsDead.com, both of which can be found via the Wayback Machine. But the videos hosted on there sadly do not work. These include 3 videos that we are aware of, which is quote, Sadeko1.mov. This video is said to have been an abstract video, although its contents aren't exactly known. It is said to have a runtime of around 30 seconds. Sadeko2.mov, which has been described to be another, even further abstract video than Sadeko 1, however it is also said to include spoilers for the movie, and Bloody1.mov, which seems to be the most recalled and most notable video out of the 3. It contained a man with a knife stabbing himself in the mouth, as if he was brushing his teeth with it, unquote. Sadly though, once the marketing for the movie was over, these websites were shut down, thus making these teasers completely lost for now. Batman Fights Dracula. This entry, according to the Lost Media Wiki, is about, quote, Batman Fights Dracula is a 1967 Filipino parody comedy film directed by Leo D. M. Diaz and written by Bert R. Mendoza, starring Jean Abalos and Dante Rivero as the titular characters respectively. As the name suggests, the movie centers around a battle between the cult figures of Batman and Dracula. It is considered by many to be one of the most sought-after lost Asian films of all time. Very little information on the film has surfaced other than standard production details such as cast and crew, although at least one person has undertaken a personal search efforts for the film, which ultimately went unfulfilled. That is until a great amount of new information surfaced on the Filipino blog Pelikula ATBP, unquote. Some of this information that was showcased includes details about the plot, which apparently would have been about a mad scientist named Dr. Zobra, who, after repeatedly being defeated by Batman, finds a way to resurrect Count Dracula, control him, and make him stronger too, such as getting rid of his weakness to crosses. Apparently Robin, or Reuben as he's called in this movie, would have found a way to kill the evil doctor by turning Dracula against him. Though several photos exist as you've seen here, sadly no footage of the movie has ever surfaced. The Blair Witch Project Amazon exclusive deleted scene. The Blair Witch Project is one of those movies that could get its own iceberg for how extensive the online marketing and mystery was for this film, as well as impact on, well, horror films thereafter. That being said, this entry is about an Amazon exclusive deleted scene for the film, which the page on the topic notes, quote, In September of 1999, Artisan Pictures had teamed up with Amazon to create a special page for the film, The Blair Witch Project. Amazon had released a deleted scene, which was exclusively released on their platform as part of Artisan Pictures' internet marketing campaign. This was actually the first time Amazon ever used streaming and would let users view it through Real Player. According to an archive of Amazon's website, the deleted scene would not be released anywhere else. In 1999, PlasticIguana.com had written a description of the deleted scene, a brief scene during the trio's stay at the hotel where Heather sets down the rules for the shoot and how she's the boss. What she says goes, since she has more money in the project than the others. The scene ends with Heather turning the camera on herself and telling the viewer that she's committed to the project and anyone who isn't can basically take a hike, unquote. Around 2001 or 2002, Amazon took the deleted scenes off of their servers, and for 23 years, no copy of this deleted scene had ever surfaced online. However, this changed on November 11th of 2024, legit like a few weeks ago at the time of this script writing. Second Sight Films released a limited edition set of the film that represented the filmmaker's complete vision. The set included exclusive new content and deleted scenes. One of the deleted scenes on the set was the once lost Amazon deleted scene, which is pretty pretty fucking cool. You can see just the scene if you like here on YouTube, uploaded by user KevBones. Also, when I clicked on this to watch the scene for myself, I'm apparently exactly the 666th person to watch this Lost Media upload. Ooh, scary. Creature from the Black Lagoon lost production material of various unmade remakes and reboots. Creature from the Black Lagoon, released in 1954, is one of the classic Universal monster movies that persists in pop culture, but unlike so many of the others, never got a remake or reboot treatment, though certainly not for a lack of trying. In fact, I'm gonna need you to buckle the fuck up and get ready, because this poor guild man has got some sort of record for films almost getting made by different passionate, talented, or interested directors or people, and the project always falling through somehow every single time. So first off, in the 1982 following of the success of An American Werewolf in London, director John Landis became interested in directing a remake of Creature from the Black Lagoon. The plot of the film would have involved two different creatures, one good and gentle and the other evil and destructive, a concept inspired by the characters Lenny and George from Of Mice and Men, both of which would end up leaving the lagoon and battle with the modern-day US Navy, which sounds pretty damn good, honestly. However, it all kind of fell through when it was decided that the film should be shot in 3D, which would have pushed the budget way too far, and apparently would have clashed with the production of Jaws 3D, and in the end, Jaws 3D was picked over the Creature film. Why they didn't just, not film it in 3D is anyone's guess, but all well. Then about 10 years later, John Carpenter began to work on the concept for a Creature from the Black Lagoon remake. Though several maquettes for the creature were made, as well as a script, the film was abruptly cancelled. Many attributed the film's cancellation due to John Carpenter's previous film, Memoirs of an Invisible Man, flopping at the box office. Which is a shame, but being perfectly honest, even as a pretty big fan of Carpenter's films, I've never seen or even heard of this one, so it must have really fucking flopped. However, it is notable that his version of the movie would have been far more violent and gory than its predecessors. Then later in 1995, director Peter Jackson was set to remake the film, but Jackson turned down the project in favor of directing a remake of King Kong. Then in 2001, shortly after the success of the 1990s The Mummy remake, Gary P. Ross was set to produce/write another attempt at a remake alongside his father, Arthur Ross, one of the original film's writers. However, this too went absolutely nowhere, and again, that's a real shame. Then, Guillermo del Toro was interested in directing his own take on the story, since he was a huge fan of the original. His version involved the film being set from the creature's point of view, and the film would have had the Gill Man and his human love interest getting together in the end. However, Universal was not open to del Toro's ideas, and with various other creative differences, the film was quietly scrapped. However, these ideas would later be reused in the film The Shape of Water. Then, James Gunn was set to make a remake, yet again after the success of a different film, that being 2004's Dawn of the Dead. However, this didn't end up going anywhere. In fact, he notes that Universal Studios turned his pitch down without even giving a reason. Breck Eisner was then set to remake the film. His vision would have been a more blatant environmentalist plot and themes, with the plot involving a pharmaceutical company spilling dangerous chemicals into the Amazon. It would have also used a blend of practical and CGI effects, but production was suddenly halted by 2007 to 2008 during the writer's strike going on at that time, and was presumably cancelled sometime after. Carl Eric Rinch was then set to remake the film in 2010, but again it was cancelled by yet another writer's strike. Another attempt at a remake, simply titled The Black Lagoon, was announced in 2012 by Universal, and it hired Dave Kajganich to write the screenplay. But again, this never came to be. Finally, a full reboot of the franchise was once planned to coincide with Universal's Dark Universe series, their attempt at a cinematic universe like Marvel or DC. Alex Kurtzman, director of the 2017 Mummy, was also attached to direct this film. However, following the critical and commercial failure of that Mummy movie, Universal's plans for the Dark Universe were abruptly cancelled, including the reboot for The Creature from the Black Lagoon. Honestly, man, it seems like if someone wants to remake this fucking movie, they need to just hunker down and do it, and not base it on the tides of other films' successes or failures. This fishman just can't catch a break. But yet again, after the success of Blumhouse's The Invisible Man reboot in 2020, there have been talks of a potential new Black Lagoon film, starring Chris Evans and Scarlett Johansson. However, I certainly wouldn't be holding my breath on that one, but I guess we'll see. Frankenstein's Monster. Frankenstein's Monster, or El Monstro de Frankenstein, is the third known film adaptation of Mary Shelley's Frankenstein novel, released in Italy in 1920. The several pamphlets and posters remain from the 1920s mentioning the movie. It was screened at locations as far as Belgium and Egypt, but no copies in any language are known to exist. Even at the time of its existence, many of its scenes were deleted by censors, with one version reportedly being cut down to 39 minutes. So it's not looking so good for this one to be found, sadly. But yet again, who knows? Deep Blue Sea, Lost Original Ending. If you're a fan of shark movies like I am, then you know this is one of the very best shark-related films out there. The plot of this movie being about a group of scientists working to find the cure for Alzheimer's disease through the research of mako sharks. However, as you might imagine, this goes awry and 3 genetically engineered sharks attempt to wreck and flood the facility to escape, leading to a great thriller film. At any rate, the ending of the movie was originally different, with the wiki noting, quote, "1 month before the film's release, the ending originally had Susan, Saffron Burrows, not only escape the shark, but deliver the killing blow to it. When audiences saw the ending, they hated it because they viewed Susan as the bad guy, and as she was behind the whole project. There were even test cars that said, 'Kill the bitch.' Later, they reshot the ending to have Susan killed by the shark, while Preacher, played by LL Cool J, became the one to deliver the killing blow. The original ending has never been released on home media, and nothing has indicated that it will ever be. The only thing to leak from the ending is a picture in which Thomas Jane and Saffron Burrows' characters share a kiss on screen," unquote. Which, I gotta say, has gotta be one of the funniest fucking changes to a film ever. They wanted that bitch dead. Would be cool to see the original ending though, as a fan of the film, especially since I feel like the character more than redeemed themselves already. It seems like a bit of an extreme reaction if I'm being perfectly honest. Maybe Shout Factory can get on that or something. The Hills Have Eyes, Lost Deleted Scenes. Yet another film that I absolutely love. Directed, written, and edited by Wes Craven, The Hills Have Eyes is about the Carter family, a suburban family targeted by a family of cannibal savages after becoming stranded in the Nevada desert. The original cut of the film was far more violent and graphic than the final product, but the MPAA wouldn't give it an R rating until some of these scenes were toned down. These cut scenes would have included, quote, the scene where Jupiter beats Fred to death, the scene where Mars and Pluto kidnap the baby, the scene where Katie hits Jupiter in the back with an axe, the scene where Jupiter eats Big Bob's arm is also more graphic, with Jupiter shoving one of the arm's fingers into Bob's eye among other things, unquote. However, sadly, pretty much nothing from these scenes, not even photographic evidence, has ever come up, making them truly and completely lost with no sign of them ever coming up anywhere. Jacob's Ladder, Lost Deleted Scenes. Jacob's Ladder is a 1990 horror film about a Vietnam War veteran who has bizarre flashbacks and hallucinations. It's well known for its disturbing and strange imagery, and is also cited as a core source of inspiration for the Silent Hill franchise, among other things like Twin Peaks. The thing is, though, is the film was actually thought to be too disturbing by test audiences. In response to this negative feedback, around 20 minutes of footage was removed from the final movie. Some of these scenes would be included in the DVD release of the movie, however several others remain lost, with only bits of them being able to be seen in trailers for the film. These scenes would have included, quote, "While in the subway bathroom, Jacob comes across a man, another man. Jacob, during one of his delivery routines, is seen eating a sandwich and reading a novel. He then sees one of the delivery bags begin to move. In the original script, it states that there may have been a scene where a homeless man was sleeping with said bag, and Jacob takes him outside and gives him money. A mute Jacob tries to scream. A sex scene between Jacob and Jesse. During this, Jacob explains how he has demons. Jacob's confession can be seen in one of the trailers. An extended scene of a reptilian Jesse dancing. A snippet of it can be seen in one of the trailers, but is unknown how long the full cut was. A scene showing one of the Hell's Hospital patients. Jacob burns down the army headquarters with a torch. In Bravo's 100 Scariest Movie Moments, a picture of Jacob holding the torch is seen. And finally, looking for Michael, Jacob finds his dismembered head inside of a cabinet, unquote. It's unknown if we'll ever end up seeing these scenes in full or what ended up happening to them. The Mummy Lost Deleted Scenes. Yet another classic Universal monster movie. In 1932, The Mummy, starring Boris Karloff, has some scenes that are sadly completely lost. The Mummy's lost love, Helen, played by Zita Joanne, can be seen in a flashback as Princess Inca Cinnamon. However, more scenes showcasing Helen's past lives were filmed. Quote, "These scenes had her appear as a Christian martyr who was devoured by lions, an 8th century Saxon princess who commits suicide after her stockade ends in her enemy's hands. It has been noted that during the credits, a Saxon warrior is listed. A 13th century lady of the castle who's pursued by the affection of a crusader, and an 18th century French court lady standing by a Versailles fountain. These scenes were cut very late into the film's production, as one can see from the Saxon warrior credit. Joanne claims these scenes were cut for two reasons. She snubbed a smitten Junior Lamel and asked him not to pick up her contract. So Junior responded by spitefully cutting her showcase sequence. And they had to protect Karloff, unquote. So in other words, it seems to have been completely out of spite. However, later in the 80s, when Universal tried to search for these scenes for a home video release, they unfortunately had no luck, with only photos of the scenes remaining. Such a shame. Chucky Wanna Play? Chucky Wanna Play is a cancelled stealth action video game based on the Child's Play horror movie franchise. The game will let you play as Chucky, and basically stealthily kill your victims in various creative ways. Basically, think something like a lower budget Hitman game or Manhunt, but playing as a little killer doll, which sounds actually pretty fun. I've maybe mentioned this sometime in the past, but one of the games I have always wanted was to have a slasher movie game that's not based around multiplayer, but is something like Hitman or something of that sort, where you can stalk and kill your victims in various creative ways, set on different settings such as a campground, suburb, a train, or various other scenarios. I think that would be absolutely sick, but at any rate, according to the wiki, quote, "The game was announced on May of 2011 by Tick Games for PC and consoles, and announced a Kickstarter campaign in October of 2012. They already had $500,000 and the rights to publish, but they needed more money to do what they wanted for the gamers. However, it was cancelled due to the money that the campaign needed to raise. Tick Games had only raised $585 with 19 backers when they are trying to raise $925,000, unquote. So, yeah, this one clearly did not get much attention, or there was just not enough of a demand for it, and thus the game never came to be. However, as you could probably tell by the background footage during this entry, the game's prototype, which was thought to be lost, was actually found on February 18th of 2023, when it was uploaded to the Internet Archive by user Riley5411, who said he found the prototype on an Xbox 360 dev kit, which is pretty cool. Being honest, the game doesn't look all that amazing, mostly because the AI of the people seem pretty lacking, which takes away a lot from the concept of the game in my opinion. but you can see what they were going for and why they probably did need more of a budget in order to flesh out the gameplay and get things more interesting. This is only a prototype after all, and it could have been better, but who knows. Kickstarter stuff usually goes pretty badly historically, so I suppose we'll never know for sure. Gremlins canceled Atari arcade game. Based on the classic 1984 film of the same name, Gremlins was gonna be an arcade cabinet that would have found its way to arcades across America for a release in 1985, but was ultimately canceled for there being multiple issues, some involving dates being missed by the devs and other projects being worked on at the same time that pushed away development time from the game, and ultimately Gremlins as a franchise just not being seen as valuable enough to warrant the time and money they needed to get the game fully going. Though it did get far enough into development that some gameplay of the prototype exists, which you can see in the background currently, it being the culmination of 2 years of work. Sadly though, no playable prototype has ever surfaced online. Besides this gameplay, that's kind of it for this one. Gremlins R-rated screenplay. While we're on the topic of Gremlins though, Gremlins is a PG film written by Chris Columbus and directed by Joe Dante, often considered a Christmas movie classic, with it being a huge box office and critical success, as something kind of for everyone, it being this mixture of whimsical comedy movie, horror movie, and Christmas film, all wrapped up into one. However, notably, the film Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, and this film, both getting a PG rating at the time, were instrumental in the MPAA eventually making an in-between rating from PG to R, that being PG-13, since neither movie really fit fully into PG or R ratings. However, the initial screenplay for Gremlins was far more graphic than what was featured in the final film, being written as a straightforward horror film with an intended R rating, and was sort of based on Columbus's love of Universal monster movies combined with his time living in New York City, where mice and rats would regularly walk by him or past his fingers if he hung his hand over the side of his bed. However, once the screenplay had made its way to the hands of Steven Spielberg, he was enthusiastic about the overall concept of the movie, calling it one of the most original things he had ever come across in years. However, he had apprehensions about the script's dark and violent nature, encouraging Columbus to rewrite what was done to make the film suitable for more general audiences. Columbus took this advice on board, with him and Spielberg collaborating on several more drafts of the screenplay, eventually resulting in the film we have today, which ended up being a pretty smart move. However, this original R-rated script was eventually found, and is now widely available for people to read if they wish, notably because of Lost Media Wiki users Acrylic and YoshiKiller2S. Apparently YoshiKiller had the screenplay in his collection for around a year, assuming it was just one of the PG drafts, until Acrylic notified him of the screenplay's contents. So, that's pretty cool. Silent Hill Cold Heart. And finally, for our last entry this tier, we have Silent Hill Cold Heart, which is the rejected pitch for a Silent Hill game from back in 2007. The game was to be developed by Climax Studios, and would have been about an emotionally unstable college student named Jessica Chambers, who is struggling with nightmares and insomnia. She would eventually start speaking with a psychiatrist, and then visit her parents to clear her head. However, she would then find herself lost in a blizzard, following the sound of an ambulance. She would then find herself within the town of Silent Hill. The game would have had a lot of Wii motion control stuff, and boasted about having an in-depth psychological profile that would build from the player's experiences in the game. This psychological profile would go on to influence later events within the game, and also the Nintendo Wi-Fi connection would have been used to report real-world weather and news for dramatic effects during gameplay. This form of the game would ultimately be rejected though, be it due to it being too ambitious or them wanting to go in a different direction. Either way, some elements of this would be later used in the game Silent Hill Shattered Memories. And that is it ladies and gentlemen, for this time. Thank you so very much for watching through the video. If you liked it, be sure to hit that like button, and if you want to see more like it, or any of the other stuff that I am making currently, be sure to subscribe as well. I want to be sure to take this opportunity to thank all of my patrons and channel members, including all of my night eggs and my night owlettes, as well as a very special thank you to all of my great night owls, including Bunzo, Bandan, Somber Devante 06, Jeffrey Robery, and Hexmaniac Hannah, as well as a super duper special thank you to all of my arch owls, including the lovely Leanne Loves Christ, the awesome Ali Elman, the daring Daniel Petrie, the Super Saiyan Star Punch Gaming, the fearless Forgotten Ace, and the Supersonic Sword. Thank you all so very much for your continued support of the channel, and until next time, this has been Dylan the Night Owl, flying off.